What did humans actually do all day in 10,000 BC? No phones, no cities, no clocks ticking on the wall. So how did we spend our time? What did a full day even look like for someone who lived 12,000 years ago? This is not a tale of cavemen. This is the story of real people, parents, hunters, weavers, thinkers, on the edge of the biggest change in human history. And by the end, we'll uncover a forgotten daily ritual, one that shaped everything that came after. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now lower your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and settle in. Let's ease into tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 1: Dawn Before the Wheel. The first light of a 10,000 BCE morning. Long before the first cities, before wheels turned or words were written down, a soft orange glow crept across the sky. The family lay together under a canopy of branches and stretched hides, nestled beside the warmth of a fire that had crackled through the night.
Noruste kroud, no klokti.
But the world itself stirred. Birds whispered in the trees. Distant animals began to rustle. And slowly, without rush or reason, the first of them blinked awake. She was the mother. Her eyes, shaped by countless sunrises, instinctively caught the dim change in the sky's hue. She didn't move yet. She listened. She reached toward the coals with a stick, nudging them to life. Before the tribe rose, the fire had to live again. In this fragile hour between darkness and day, she held the responsibility of warmth. Her children still dreamed, but she was the firekeeper, and her work began in silence. Their shelter wasn't a house. It was a lean-to, partly framed with bones from hunts past, covered in grass, bark, and whatever could be tied down with sinew. The floor was the ground. The mattress was furs. Around them were other sleeping clusters, family units sharing warmth. The father stirred next, not from sound but from a chill. Cold had crept up his back where the fur had slipped. He reached for a rock, still warm near the ashes, and pulled it close to his belly. Then he sat up slowly, not out of urgency, but rhythm. In this world, morning was not a burst of activity. It was a slow emergence. He checked the sky, then the wind. Clouds whispered of change. He didn't know the term for pressure or humidity, but he could read the air like others read books. Today would be dry. His shoulders tensed. That meant a long walk. He said nothing, but began tying his sandals from woven bark strips. The fire, now coaxed into a soft flame, offered its first gift: light. The small flickers illuminated the mother's hands as she unwrapped a pouch of dried berries and root chips. These had been gathered days before, tucked away in smoked skins. There was no meal schedule, no breakfast table. Food was taken in small pieces whenever it could be spared. She placed a few into her children's hands, still sleeping, and their little fingers closed around them reflexively. Hunger was constant, but not desperate. It shaped every day, guided every decision, but never panicked the heart. She rubbed her hands together not to clean them, but to feel them. Numb fingers meant poor blood flow. She needed them working today, whether to carve, carry, or tend. Her ears stayed alert. No danger yet, no thunder. just the gentle cough of a neighbor waking nearby. Another woman, another fire. The camp was beginning to breathe. The day was arriving, not as a sudden force, but like a tide rising softly. A child stirred, the youngest. His name was never written, only spoken. He blinked through sleep and looked at the embers, then at his mother. She tapped her chest and pointed to the sky. He understood mourning. His small body was wrapped in hair pelts, soft and stitched with needles made from bone. He sat up and peered around, still unsure if the day had truly started or if they were still in the quiet place between dreams. A low growl in his belly answered for him. He chewed the dried roots slowly, feeling the flavor deepen. Around the camp, others were also waking, stretching, shaking out limbs, stepping barefoot into the grass. This was not a society with alarms, but one with deep routines. Every creature, human or otherwise, had a role to play before the sun took its place. Even the dogs, half-wild companions, were up now. Their noses tested the breeze, their tails low but alert. Today had begun. Not all awoke with grace. One of the elders, a hunched man with cloudy eyes, mumbled and muttered through his rising. He had once run with the hunters. Now he shuffled near the fire and coughed. The mother gave him a few root slices, and he grunted thanks with a nod. Age was respected, but there was no reverence for weakness. Everyone contributed. He would be carving points today if his fingers allowed it. Not far from him, two adolescents whispered and laughed, still caught between dreams and responsibility. Soon they would carry water from the stream. But for now, they leaned on each other, swaying like saplings in the wind. The camp was fully awake now, but no one rushed. Each movement flowed from necessity, not schedule. The sun had not yet cleared the trees, but the world was golden. Every hour of daylight mattered. Soon it would be time to move or to stay, depending on what the scouts found at the edges. The mother turned her attention to the fire again. She placed a few dry pine cones into the coals. They flared up briefly. The scent carried a signal. Fire was more than heat. It was message, safety, a center. Every camp had one, and its health reflected the tribe's own. Her mate returned, a sharp rock in one hand, a feather in the other. He said little but nodded toward the east. He had seen fresh deer tracks. He would not wait for a group. This would be a solo hunt. She frowned but didn't stop him. He pressed a warm stone into her palm and walked off. His shadow long behind him, he vanished into the underbrush. She didn't watch him leave. Instead, she pressed the stone to her face, a ritual of sorts, silent. Then she stood and began folding the sleeping skins, shaking out bits of leaves and twigs. Every task was deliberate, nothing wasted. Even their steps mattered, patterned across generations. Nearby, a young girl had started a different task, gathering eggs from a hidden clutch near the tree line. She crept carefully, not to disturb the nesting birds. If disturbed, they would flee for good, and the camp would lose a precious food source. Her movements were studied, slow and fluid, learned not from instructions but from watching, failing, and repeating. The eggs were warm in her hands. She placed them into a basket of woven grass and hurried back. Not a word passed between her and the mother, but a glance exchanged thanks. This was the rhythm of the tribe, not based on commands but on observation. Around them, The forest pulsed with life. The insects hummed louder now. The mist began to lift, and from the hill, a low call, a scout's voice mimicking a bird. All clear, no predators spotted, no travelers near. It was safe to remain here at least for another day. That was a relief. Moving was always a burden. Back at the fire, one of the older boys knelt beside a flat rock. In his hands he held two stones, one sharp, one softer. With focused intent, he began the careful process of shaping a cutting edge. Sparks occasionally flicked from the pressure. He didn't flinch. This was his morning work. Not glamorous, not heroic, but necessary. A fresh blade meant cleaner cuts, safer meals, better defense. He tapped rhythmically, instinct guiding his pressure. His mother watched out of the corner of her eye, pleased. She remembered the first time she did the same. These acts, though simple, were woven with meaning. They spoke of continuity, survival, legacy, and in every motion, from flint strike to fire tend, they repeated what had been done for countless generations. This was not just a morning routine. It was the spine of human life in 10,000 BCE. A choreography older than memory, danced each dawn without music or fanfare, only instinct and earth beneath their feet. One of the women, a cousin or sister, it was hard to say, approached with an animal hide slung over her shoulder. It had soaked overnight in a stream and now had to be scraped clean. She hung it on a branch and began with a flat stone, removing bits of flesh still clinging to it. Her hands were swift and practiced. She sang no song, but her rhythm was steady, like breath. Others nearby saw what she was doing and picked up their own tasks, repairing sandals, checking fishing lines, sharpening bone hooks. Morning was a weaving of hands. No leader gave orders, yet somehow everything was accomplished. The smell of wet leather, smoke, and pine needles filled the air. This was not idleness. This was preparation, because even though no clocks ruled them, time moved forward. The sun now peeked through the canopy, casting long lines of gold across the camp. Morning would not last forever. A shadow passed overhead, a hawk, scanning for rodents or snakes. Its wings spread wide, gliding silently. The children paused to look up. Some pointed. One mimicked its flight with outstretched arms. But the moment passed, and the work resumed. Birds of prey were both admired and feared. They reminded the tribe that the skies, too, watched. A sudden shriek from the trees startled the dogs. But it was just a monkey protesting their presence. The forest was alive, and it spoke in dozens of languages. Every sound meant something. The humans had no written script, but their ears were attuned to this chorus. A strange silence, a distant howl, a change in the rhythm of frogs. These were as important as any scroll. The morning was now in full bloom. Light had banished the last of the shadows, and with it came a sense of order but not peace. Every day was a wager, but they faced it together, one breath at a time. The young mother sat briefly, finally letting her shoulders drop. Her children now played quietly with stones and sticks, pretending at hunts or imitating their father's walk. She watched them, heart tight with both love and worry. Each day was a chance to grow stronger or to vanish. Illness could come quietly. A misstep on a trail could mean death. But these thoughts didn't drown her. They sharpened her focus. She glanced at the sky again, clear, wide, and pale blue. Good weather. Maybe even enough time today to smoke more meat, if the hunt was successful. Her hands ran over her tools, checking each one. Bone needle, flint scraper, gut thread. She hummed softly, not for melody, but rhythm. In her hum was a language as old as fire, and it told her the day had truly begun. There was no ceremony, no declaration, but in the stillness of her breath and the glow of the flames, morning had become life once more. Every day began this way, no matter where the tribe had camped. Whether near rivers, plains, or forests, the ritual of morning was universal. And though their tools were few and words unrecorded, the minds behind those eyes were not primitive. They were aware, skilled, attuned to nature's every mood. This was humanity before clocks, before roads, but not before meaning. As the last of the morning mist dissolved and insects filled the air with their songs, the tribe was fully awake. Not just in body, but in purpose. They would seek food. They would mend what broke. They would teach the young, honor the old, and protect their own. But none of it could begin without this silent rhythm of rising, of warmth, of sky-gazing and fire tending. Before agriculture, before industry, there was this, a morning built from instincts, shadows, and breath. And it shaped not just their day, but the very roots of our own human story. Chapter 2: Feeding the Tribe, Foraging, Fishing, and the Hunt. The sun had just broken above the trees, and already the camp was in motion. Hunger was not a feeling. It was a constant presence, woven into every thought, every step, every plan. There were no granaries, no stores of bread. If the tribe wanted to eat today, they had to find it. The air was cool but not biting, perfect for movement. The man who left earlier for the hunt had vanished into the woods, his trail barely a whisper in the grass. Others now followed, each with a task. 3 women set out with woven baskets slung across their backs. They moved silently, speaking only with gestures, scanning the underbrush for roots, leaves, or mushrooms. Further down a trail, 2 boys and an elder woman made their way toward the river. They carried lines made of twisted gut and small, sharp hooks carved from bone. It was time to cast into the water and hope something living pulled back. Foraging was not guesswork. It was a practiced science, honed over lifetimes. The women moved with practiced confidence. Their eyes flicked to small signs. Wilted leaves meant tubers beneath. A particular shade of green hinted at edible shoots. One knelt and gently pried up a plant with a flat stone, revealing a swollen root. She sniffed it, then bit a tiny piece. Not bitter, good. Into the basket it went. Another woman scraped off tree bark, gathering the soft inner layers, rich in calories. They didn't forage randomly. The forest was their map, and each season redrew it. One of them paused and pointed at a patch of mushrooms. The others froze. One wrong bite could kill. Carefully they tested the caps, broke the stems. They chose only a few. These women remembered which plants made the stomach swell, which ones soothed fever, and which kept a child quiet through the night. They carried no books, yet knew more than most modern scientists ever would. Meanwhile, at the riverbank, the 2 boys crouched low, watching the water. It flowed gently, catching the light in flashes. One boy dipped his fingers in, feeling the current's speed. Too fast in the middle, too slow near the edges. The elder woman handed them small hooks. They tied them to sinew cords and dropped them into the stream, weighted with pebbles. They didn't sit idly. Their eyes stayed alert for ripples, flashes of silver beneath the surface. This was patience, learned from years of watching older hands do the same. The fish here were not plentiful, but they were smart. They hid in shaded pools, darted under roots. The younger boy grinned suddenly. A tug. He pulled gently, then harder. A small, wriggling fish flapped onto the stones. Not enough for a meal, but a good sign. They reset the line. This would take hours. No rods, no nets large enough for the river's width. Just quiet focus and the hope that nature offered something in return. Back in the woods, the mother of the camp approached a marshy patch with her basket bearers. She crouched low, sniffing the air. The wet soil held promise. Her fingers combed through reeds until she found what she sought, a patch of cattails. She broke a stalk and examined the base. Starchy, soft. She scraped it clean with a blade and bit it. Still fresh. A signal passed through the group, and they began collecting. This wasn't just about feeding mouths. It was about choosing wisely. They took only a portion, always leaving enough to regrow. The forest wasn't endless. They knew that. Too much greed meant tomorrow's hunger would be worse. One girl discovered berries near a thorny bush and eagerly reached in. A quick slap on the wrist from the elder stopped her. The red berries looked tempting, but they were deceivers. The girl's mistake was met not with anger, but a lesson. Survival didn't forgive carelessness. Every bite was a decision between nourishment and death. Elsewhere, deeper in the shadows of the trees, the man from earlier crept slowly across a narrow game trail. His body was low, nearly part of the earth itself. He had seen tracks. Deer. Not fresh, but recent enough. His breath came slow and measured. In one hand he held a spear. In the other, a stone with markings. A talisman, a charm, something passed from hunter to hunter. Not for luck, but memory. The trail bent slightly, and he saw it. A patch of disturbed earth, hoof prints, and a broken branch. His pulse quickened. The animal was nearby. He pressed his ear to the ground. Faint vibrations, still within reach. He moved in a crouch, avoiding twigs, testing each step. A rustle, he froze. A flicker of brown behind the ferns. It was feeding, oblivious. He gripped the spear tighter. This was not just a hunt. It was a test. If he failed, the camp would eat less. If he succeeded, they would have meat, bone, skin, life itself. The deer raised its head. Ears twitching, it sensed something. The man froze mid-breath. A single wrong move and the moment would vanish. He waited. Minutes passed like eternities. Then, with a final breath, he rose and hurled the spear with all his strength. The weapon sailed in silence, slicing the air. A thud, then chaos. The deer bolted, stumbling, bleeding. He chased, feet pounding the trail, leaping over logs, ducking branches. The forest was a blur of motion. Finally, he found it collapsed near a ravine, its sides heaving. The spear had struck true. He approached slowly, eyes never leaving the animal. With one final thrust, he ended its pain. Blood soaked the soil. He knelt beside it, not in triumph, but respect. He whispered to himself, touched the ground, and began the work. The hide was removed carefully, the meat sliced into strips. Nothing wasted. Even the bones would become tools. The forest had given, and he had taken only what was needed. Back at the river, the boys now had 2 fish, and their lines were still in. The elder woman had gathered water in hollowed gourds, rinsing them in the current. She watched the treetops, scanning for birds. Her eyes narrowed. A heron stood nearby, motionless, its neck curved like a bow. She pointed. The younger boy mimicked it, pretending to strike. She laughed softly, teaching through mimicry. The fish were cleaned with sharp stones. No fire yet. That would come later. For now, they were strung through vines and carried back toward camp. Their feet knew the way. This route had been walked hundreds of times. And as they passed certain trees, they left small marks, scratches, or tied reeds. Trail signs, not writing but memory carved into nature. The forest was their book, their pantry, their school. Each trip out taught them something new. The boys talked quietly about the fish, what made them bite, where the river curved best. These were lessons they would pass on. The women returned from the marsh with bulging baskets. Their backs ached, but their faces showed satisfaction. A good haul. Roots, shoots, seeds, and greens. Enough for stews and drying. As they neared the camp, the scent of smoke greeted them. The fire had been fed again. Others had returned with dry wood. A woman sat nearby, pounding acorns into powder with a round stone. She sifted the bitter skins from the flour, her hands moving in rhythm. The returning gatherers added their finds to the growing pile beside her. A child came and poked through it, wide-eyed. He pulled out a strange tuber. The mother handed it to him after slicing off the bitter tip. He nibbled and chewed. Food was not served. It was shared, pieces handed out here and there. A taste here, a bite there. It kept everyone sustained until the main preparation. There were no mealtimes, only hunger and response. The camp thrived not by abundance, but by balance. As the sun rose higher, the hunters began returning in pairs and small groups. Some carried birds strung by their necks. Others had nothing but still brought news, where tracks had led, what animals were nearby. This information was as valuable as food. It shaped tomorrow's plans. The man with the deer returned last, dragging a sled made of curved branches. The camp buzzed with quiet energy as others came to help. Children ran to see. Some touched the antlers. Others watched the blood-stained hands with reverence. The body was hung from a low branch. The skin was peeled away, tanned later. The meat was sliced thin, laid over racks to dry. A fire was stoked higher. Smoke would cure the flesh, preserving it. The bones were sorted. Each had a purpose. Knives, needles, tools, nothing was wasted. The air now smelled of burning wood, fresh meat, crushed herbs. Survival was not dramatic. It was deliberate, a sequence of acts, rooted in necessity and seasoned with memory. One woman took a bowl-shaped rock and filled it with water. She placed it near the fire and dropped in hot stones with sticks. The water hissed and steamed. Into it she added herbs, roots, and bits of meat. A stew thick and bubbling. This would be the closest thing to a shared meal today. Others dipped small pieces of bark into it, scooping and tasting. The heat filled their bellies, and for a moment, the hunger dulled. But the work was not finished. Some of the meat had to be smoked through the night. Someone would take shifts. The youngest children were given soft berries and mash. Elders were offered the fattiest cuts. Strength had to be maintained. This wasn't generosity, it was strategy. The tribe needed every member functioning. Evening would come later, but now they had bought more time. They had eaten. They had filled their baskets. They had lived another day. And in 10,000 BCE, that alone was victory. By now, the camp smelled like life. Fish scaled and drying, meat sizzling on stones, roots roasting slowly. The dogs circled but never stole. They knew their place. The children mimicked the hunters, throwing sticks and practicing aim. Some women began sorting seeds found in the forest. Not for planting, not yet, but for eating raw or drying. Tiny hands helped. No one was idle unless too weak to rise. Hunger didn't allow rest. But even so, there were moments of calm. Sitting under trees, chewing slowly, wiping sweat from the brow. A woman told a boy how to gut a bird. He listened carefully, eyes locked on her hands. This was education, this was family. And as the sun passed its peak, the tribe had done what they were meant to do. They had hunted, fished, foraged, cleaned, and cooked. They had earned the warmth of the fire and the stories that would come later. But first, the world had to be fed. Before the sky turned orange, they gathered around the drying racks and pots. The deer's ribs were stripped clean. The roots roasted through. Even the smallest bits were saved. The man who made the kill now rested, chewing quietly, his eyes distant. He had brought back more than food. He had brought back assurance. Tomorrow could be faced again. The children curled near their mothers, licking juice from their fingers. The smell of smoke clung to their hair, and though no one said it aloud, they all felt it, the satisfaction of survival. Not triumph, not celebration, just quiet endurance. The forest had tested them, and they had answered. When the stars returned, they would remember today. In silence around firelight, with hands greasy from meat and hearts just a little more full. Because in 10,000 BCE, every meal was a miracle, and every bite a reminder that nature gave only what you were willing to work for. Chapter 3: Fireside Industries: Tools, Weaving, and Prehistoric Innovation. The sun had begun its slow descent, warming the ground with long amber light. In the heart of the camp, the fires burned steadily, no longer just for cooking, but for creation. The hunt was over, the foraging done. Now came the quieter work, the hours of shaping, building, fixing. Here, under flickering shadows, true ingenuity came to life. Around one fire, an elder woman sat with a curved blade of flint in her lap. Her fingers, scarred but nimble, guided the edge along a thick piece of hide. She wasn't just cutting, she was measuring by memory. The hide would become part of a sling or water pouch. Across from her, a young boy sharpened a bone needle, carefully twirling it between his fingers, smoothing the end with sandstone. These tasks may have seemed simple, but they were the foundation of survival. Spears broke, clothes tore, snares failed. If no one made replacements, tomorrow's success could turn into disaster overnight. A teenage girl crouched beside a pile of dry reeds and sinew. Her job was to twist. One hand anchored the fibers, the other spun. Over and over, she made twine strong enough to bind tools, lash shelters, or set traps. Twisting cordage wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Without rope, nothing held together. As she worked, She glanced toward another woman nearby who was weaving a net. Thin bones served as needles, and the net slowly took shape like a spider's web. Its future use wasn't yet decided, maybe for catching fish, maybe for hauling kindling. In another part of the camp, someone else was grinding stone against stone, shaping a hand axe from basalt. The sound was soft but steady. Scrape, scrape, scrape. These weren't distractions or hobbies. They were industries, done without factories, without blueprints. Yet every item had purpose. Every movement, a result of centuries of trial, error, and passed down precision. Around the fires, the tribe transformed nature into tools. Nearby, a boy studied the chipped remains of a broken spearhead. He turned it over in his hand, trying to see why it failed. The break was jagged, too brittle. He set it beside others. Failure was part of learning. The toolmakers understood this. Around them were piles of shards, evidence of attempts that didn't work. But they didn't see waste. They saw experience. Obsidian flakes were gathered and reused, sometimes as blades for small tasks, sometimes as barbs for fishhooks. At one end of the camp, a man struck a chunk of flint with another stone, directing the force just so. A flake popped off cleanly, razor sharp. He smiled faintly. That piece could skin a deer in seconds. Around him, others watched and learned. These weren't solitary geniuses. They were collaborators in a world without measurement. Angles were judged by feel. Pressure was remembered by muscle. Innovation was not a revolution. It was a whisper, passed from one pair of hands to another. Beyond the fires, under a low tree, a woman prepared dyes from crushed berries and clay. She added water slowly, checking consistency. Beside her were long strips of woven grass, ready to absorb the colors. These patterns weren't just decoration. They identified families, marked ownership, or held spiritual meaning. Color and symbol worked like language in a world before letters. As the dyed strips dried, children came to help, poking their fingers into the pigment. Some marked their cheeks with swirls. Others stamped dots onto their arms. It was playful but not meaningless. Through symbols and markings, identity took shape. Elsewhere, someone was shaping antler into a curved hook. They used a shard of obsidian to carve, moving with care not to split the material. Took time, hours. But time was not wasted. In 10,000 BCE, progress wasn't measured by speed. It was measured by precision, by function, by whether the next hunt or storm could be faced with greater confidence. Even the ashes of earlier fires served a purpose. A woman mixed cold ash with animal fat, creating a thick, gray paste. This could waterproof skins or serve as insect repellent. She smeared some along her forearm and nodded in satisfaction. Another practical innovation. Nothing in the camp existed just for show. Even beauty had use. Bone beads strung on twine could be worn, yes, but also bartered or counted or used in rituals. Around the fire, a man repaired the base of a basket with fine reeds. His fingers worked with practiced speed. Each weave had to hold tension or the basket would collapse. Children sat near, imitating his movements with sticks. No school existed here, but learning was everywhere. Watching, repeating, failing, trying again. Across the camp, a girl had begun crafting a whistle from a bird bone. Not for music, for signaling. In dense forests, sound carried better than words. She tested it once, heard the high-pitched call, then smiled. Another tool finished. One young man sat apart, near the edge of the clearing. His hands held a lump of hardened clay. Slowly, he shaped it into a bowl, pressing the sides thin, smoothing with water. Clay pots were rare here. The soil was not ideal, but he had found a deposit near the stream that might work. It was an experiment. His first two bowls had cracked in the fire, but he tried again. If it held together this time, they could carry water without needing animal skin. That would change everything. Less hunting for bladders, more reliable containers. He placed the bowl in the sun, rotating it as it dried. Others glanced his way occasionally, curious but silent. They had seen his failures. Still, they respected the risk. Invention in 10,000 BCE meant patience. Risk, hope. When the sun set, he would place it near the coals, not too close, and wait through the night. Maybe it would crumble again, or maybe it would hold. As shadows lengthened, more people gathered near the fires. The work didn't stop, but it softened. A woman used a thin stick to carve spirals into a piece of wood, perhaps a toy, perhaps a ritual object. She didn't explain. Not everything was utilitarian. Even here, art had its place. A man adjusted a head wrap made from woven fibers. Its edges dyed with ochre. He had no mirror, but his fingers knew the shape. He walked past the others with a quiet pride. Dignity didn't depend on wealth. It depended on skill. Another woman began patching a tear in a fur cloak, threading gut through tiny holes. Her needle had been sharpened that morning, her stitches nearly invisible. No one called her a tailor, but her work meant warmth in winter. She might never be remembered, but her hands would keep someone alive when snow came. In this world, creation was rarely celebrated, but it was always needed. Fireside industries were the pulse of survival. A pair of boys practiced throwing small stones at a distant log, not for play but precision. Their future might depend on that aim. Beside them, a girl used a shell to scoop water into a cracked pot. It leaked slightly. She patched the crack with wet clay and ash, hoping it would dry strong. This was how solutions emerged in bits and trials. Every tool had a story, written not with words but with scars, burns, and calluses. Near one fire, a trader from another camp displayed a blade wrapped in sinew. The others examined it carefully, nodding. There was interest. He might trade it for dried meat or salt. Tools traveled, ideas traveled too. Though each tribe lived in its own forest or valley, knowledge moved with them. A better spear point, a sturdier basket weave, a more durable glue. All of it passed by word of mouth and demonstration. Technology did not explode. Spread slowly, patiently, fire to fire, hand to hand. That afternoon, a young woman tried something new. She bound two sharpened stones together with cord and resin, hoping for a better cutting edge. The result looked odd, too heavy maybe, but she tested it on a strip of leather. It sliced clean, promising. She placed it on a flat stone beside the others. A few children watched with wide eyes. One asked if he could try it. She shook her head. Not yet. Tools were not toys. Injuries could be deadly. Still, she smiled slightly. She had created something different, not by accident but design. Invention lived in the quiet corners of the camp, where curiosity met patience. The fire beside her crackled. Smoke drifted into the trees. From a distance, the camp looked still, but at its core it was humming, not with noise, but with intention, with hands moving, minds wondering, small changes stacking into legacies. The future, unimagined and unnamed, was slowly forming beside the fire. As the sky began to turn gold, the day's final works neared completion. The net was nearly finished, the basket sealed, the tools sorted, the dyes dry. The boy with the clay bowl inspected it again. Still intact, hopeful. Others laid their finished items in piles, cords, hooks, beads. Some would be used tomorrow. Some traded, some stored. The fireside glowed brighter now, warming not just bodies, but ambition. A girl placed her newly carved whistle in a pouch. Another tucked her painted grass strips into her belt. Around them, the camp's industry was visible in every corner, evidence that human minds never stopped adapting. The hunt fed the tribe. The fire warmed it. But these hands shaping stone, fiber, bone, and clay, they built the future. Slowly, quietly, with no names recorded, but their legacy lived on, in every thread of rope, every sharpened edge, in every silent improvement that carried us one invention at a time out of the wild. As night approached, the camp fell into a quieter rhythm. Embers glowed under fading light. The sounds of scraping and carving gave way to the crackle of flame and the occasional murmur. But in the dark, their creations remained. Baskets stacked, tools sharpened, ideas waiting to be tested tomorrow. This was a world with no factories, no manuals, no blueprints. Yet the seeds of engineering, design, and creativity were already present. Not with grandeur, but with purpose. These fireside industries were not side tasks. They were civilization in its earliest breath. 1,000 small actions, done with care, passed from generation to generation. As the stars began to blink awake overhead, the tribe sat surrounded by the proof of their minds. Not just survivors, but creators, innovators of their age. And even if no one wrote their names, the things they built endured. In the sparks of firelight, in the hands of children learning by watching, the future had already begun to take shape. Chapter 4: The Children's World. Learning without schools. Long before sunrise, small eyes opened to the rustle of branches and the flicker of orange light. A boy, no older than 6, stirred beneath a rough hide. His mother was already gone, likely tending the fire or gathering morning roots. Around him, other children yawned and stretched. There were no bells, no teachers, no walls. But make no mistake, today was school. It began the moment their feet touched the earth. A girl crawled out from under a shelter, her fingers tracing lines in the dirt as she followed the tracks of a lizard. The lesson: observation, quiet attention. Behind her, a slightly older boy mimicked his father, gripping a stick as if it were a spear. He practiced balance, crouching low, his eyes focused on imaginary prey. This was no game. It was rehearsal for survival. The forest was their classroom, the wind their instruction, and every scraped knee or failed throw carved a deeper lesson than any written word ever could. By mid-morning, the children began to drift after the adults. They moved like shadows, always watching. When a woman bent to dig a tuber, a young girl mirrored her, poking at the soil. Her small hands weren't strong enough yet, but they learned the feel of the earth, the scent of edible roots. A boy watched his older brother lay a snare. He saw how the loop was hidden, how the tension was set. He didn't ask questions. He studied. In this world, knowledge was earned in silence, caught like a breath in the stillness between tasks. If a child spoke too loudly, birds scattered, and the lesson ended. So they learned to speak less, to listen more. They learned to track without maps, to remember without notes, to navigate by stars and shadows. Their tests weren't written. They were lived. Miss a lesson and your trap fails. Fail too often and you go hungry. Childhood wasn't leisure. It was the beginning of responsibility. The older children took on more serious apprenticeships. A girl of 11 followed her grandmother, who was weaving a net with fine reeds. She didn't just watch. She was given a handful of reeds and told to mimic the rhythm. Over and under, tighten and loop. Her fingers stumbled, the weave sagged, but the elder didn't correct her with words. She simply let her redo it. The net had to hold. Failure wasn't punished. It was built into the process. A nearby boy was tasked with grinding pigment. He watched his uncle mix ash with berry juice, then tried it himself. His first batch was too thin, the second too thick, but the third stuck to the bone surface just right. Slowly he understood. The children weren't memorizing. They were becoming. The people around them were their teachers, their books, their lessons, all wrapped in bone and breath. Every task they tried was a story passed down, not told in words, but in motion. No chalkboard marked the center of their world, but the woods did. The forest taught caution and reward. A group of children crept through the underbrush, mimicking the stealth of the older hunters. One boy stepped on a dry twig. Snap, the group froze, birds scattered, lesson learned. Another girl picked a mushroom and carried it back proudly. An elder sniffed it, frowned, and tossed it into the fire. Poisonous. The girl didn't cry. She remembered the color, the smell. She would not forget. Children were not scolded for mistakes, only for forgetfulness. Because in 10,000 BCE, memory was survival. They built their minds the way their elders built tools, by trial, shape, and repetition. Each stone they turned over, each creature they spotted, added layers to an internal library. No shelves, no scrolls, just knowing. And once knowledge was gained, it stayed for life. There was no graduation, no end of school year, only the slow, lifelong unfolding of wisdom in motion. Sometimes learning came from stories, but not the way we know them now. A group of children sat beside a woman stirring a pot over fire. She told them about a time a boy wandered too far from camp and met a wolf. The tale was simple, but her tone carried weight. She described the boy's fear, the sound of the growl, the cold breath on his neck. The children leaned in. The story ended with the boy surviving because he climbed a tree. But the lesson wasn't fantasy. It was instruction. Trees could save lives. Wolves traveled in silence. Fear could be useful if it led to caution. Every tale had a purpose. These weren't fairy tales. They were encoded advice shaped by years of danger and survival. Children carried these stories like charms in their minds. They repeated them to younger ones. The words shifted, but the meaning stayed. Culture, memory, warning. All wrapped in a single afternoon tale beside boiling broth. At other times, it was the land itself that taught. One boy followed a set of fresh tracks across soft soil. He crouched, touching the indentations. Not human, probably deer. The tracks veered left, toward the denser brush. He followed, stepping where the prints led. He looked up and saw a broken twig, then fur on the bark. His heart pounded. He didn't see the animal, but he'd mapped its story. Later, when he sat by the fire, he traced the path in the dirt for his siblings. The lesson rippled out. Others learned because he had tried. A girl near the river spotted bubbles rising in still water. She asked her cousin, who whispered that it meant a frog or eel was beneath. The next day, she showed the same thing to another child. Knowledge moved in circles like ripples in water. Children didn't wait for teachers. They became each other's guides, building layers of skill in games that weren't games at all. In this world, play and practice were the same thing. When children threw stones at targets, they were preparing for the hunt. When they chased each other through trees, they were learning footwork, timing, and silence. A group of girls braided fibers into long ropes, racing to see who could finish fastest. The winner's rope held tight. Hers would be used in real traps. The others watched and mimicked her grip. Boys carved sticks into shapes, some into spears, others into fishhooks. They tried them in the stream, laughed at their failures, then carved again. Each iteration taught something new. Even when they rolled bones like dice, they studied how they landed, how the elder beside them interpreted their meaning. It wasn't idle play. It was a lifelong apprenticeship disguised as fun. Their games trained hands, sharpened instincts, and prepared bodies for the years ahead. There was no line between play and work. There was only life, and every moment was part of the lesson. Language itself was a lesson. Children learned words not through lists, but through need. If a root cured sickness, they remembered its name. If a sound meant danger, it etched itself into their minds. They learned words by watching how they were used, by hearing a hunter grunt toward the treetops and then noticing the movement above. They repeated chants during rituals, not knowing their full meaning, but feeling their weight. When a child misused a word, an elder might correct them with a story, or simply ignore them until they got it right. Communication wasn't just speech. It was gesture, eye contact, body rhythm. A child could learn a full lesson without hearing a single sentence. They learned to read silences, to understand urgency in tone, to hear tension in a footstep, and by the time they reached adolescence, they carried a living language shaped by the forest, by the fire, by hands and heart and the rhythm of the world. By late afternoon, children returned to the camp in scattered pairs. Their bodies bore the day's lessons. Muddy hands, scraped knees, feathers and hair, stained fingers from berries. Some had nothing to show, but still carried stories. A girl held a twisted piece of bark and told her sister it had curled when she set it near the fire. A boy held a sharpened stick and said it made a different sound when cutting grass than cutting vines. Small things, but these were the roots of understanding. Their elders listened, not with praise but with interest. Knowledge, after all, could come from anyone, even the young. Around the fire, the tribe fed their minds as much as their bellies. And the children, even while eating, watched again. They watched how stew was stirred, how meat was divided, how dried herbs were chosen. Learning didn't stop when the work ended. It lingered, in glances and gestures, in patterns they would one day imitate perfectly. Night drew closer, and a mother tucked her child beneath a fur cloak. The child clutched a carved figurine made of bone. Not a toy, but a memory, a symbol passed down to soothe and teach. Across the camp, another child lay tracing the stars with her finger. Her father had told her which ones moved, which ones stayed. Tonight she would watch. She didn't need to be told twice. These stars had shaped migrations, told stories, and warned of weather. And now they became her silent textbook. In the dark, two boys whispered about a rabbit trail they had found but not followed. Tomorrow, they said, they would try again. Their plans were made not of whim, but of purpose. Learning wasn't forced. It was chosen, pursued, absorbed. Childhood in 10,000 BCE was not idle. It was intense, rich, purposeful. And even as sleep overtook their small bodies, the next lesson waited, curled beside them, wrapped in silence and firelight. Sleep came gently, the camp hushed, the fire dimmed. Children, worn from a full day, lay close to their families. And in their dreams, the lessons continued. They dreamed of running through forests, of spotting deer prints, of weaving baskets that held every drop of water. The brain, even in rest, rehearsed the patterns it had absorbed. Their bodies were young, but their minds were already sharp with knowing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a new track to follow, a new knot to tie, and with each passing day, these children became more than children. They became keepers of tradition, repositories of knowledge, future makers of tools and stories and homes. No walls enclosed their education. No parchment recorded their growth. But every scar, every laugh, every whispered secret in the woods told the truth. Learning had always been part of being human. And in 10,000 BCE, the world itself was the only school they would ever need. Chapter 5: Songs, Stories, and Shadows. Culture before written language. The sky deepened into a warm blue as the last embers of the sun vanished behind the trees. The air cooled, and the sounds of labor faded. Fires sparked to life across the camp. No longer tools for cooking or crafting, but beacons for gathering. People drifted in from the edges of the forest, some returning from the hunt, others from the river. Slowly, the camp began to breathe as one again. Children clung to parents, and elders took their places beside the flames. These moments were sacred, not in the way of temples or altars, but in rhythm. Each evening carried the same slow pulse. After a day of chasing, carving, watching, and learning, people turned toward each other. Here, in the circle of light, something intangible came to life. Words, gestures, sounds that held no shape on paper, but lived, repeated, remembered. Before books, before symbols, there was voice. And around the fire, voice became memory. It often began with rhythm, a simple beat, someone tapping a stick on a log, or a stone against a stone. A soft cadence that matched the pace of walking or the drumming of a heart. Others joined. Hands slapped thighs, feet tapped ground. Then came humming, a sound without words, but rich with mood. These weren't songs in the way we know them. They were soundscapes, echoes of animals, weather, journeys. Music had no notes, no instruments beyond bone flutes or hollow reeds. Yet it carried something deeper than melody. It held emotion, unity, a pulse shared by the group. One voice would rise, then another. Not solos, but layers. Even the children knew when to join, when to pause. This was not performance. It was communion. The camp swayed, not in dance, but in awareness. The music was not something to remember. It was something to feel. And though it vanished into the air, it always returned the next night. After the rhythms softened, came the stories. They did not start with grand declarations. They emerged naturally, like smoke from a log. An elder leaned forward and spoke a name, place, a moment from long ago. The listeners leaned in. They knew the characters, though none had ever met them. These were not just tales of animals and spirits. They were maps of belief, blueprints of identity. One story might explain why the moon changed shape. Another warned of a time the river ran dry. Some told of heroes, others of mistakes. But each one carried more than a lesson, carried the voice of those who came before. The listeners knew the pauses. They mouthed the endings, but still they listened as if it were new. Because the story was not just information, it was transformation. In those moments, listeners became the storyteller. Memory passed through breath, and the tribe remembered itself, not through writing, but through sound and silence. Some stories were shared with laughter, others with quiet reverence. A woman recalled a time lightning struck too close, and her mimicry of the thunder had children rolling in the dirt. Another told of a wolf with eyes that glowed like fire, and a hush fell over the flames. Children leaned into their parents. The elders' faces flickered in the firelight, their eyes reflecting more than memory, belief, caution, wonder. These stories were not distractions. They were warnings encoded in emotion. A tale of a child who disrespected the forest and vanished was more than a fable. It was a boundary marker, passed from generation to generation, keeping danger at bay. No laws were written, no punishments announced, but everyone knew the stories, and in knowing them they carried the shape of their world. They knew which rivers to fear, which animals to revere, which dreams to trust. Their stories were not entertainment. They were the structure of the invisible rules they lived by. Hands often moved with the stories. An elder gestured to show the winding of a serpent, or the fall of a tree, or the rising of the sun over distant hills. These movements etched the words into memory. A child might forget a phrase, but remember the way the hand curved. Over time, gestures became part of the language. Some stories could be told entirely in movement. A hunter mimed the chase of a deer, the stumble, the quiet strike. No words needed, the body spoke. Others used painted stones, feathers, or carved figures, props to anchor imagination. These items were passed hand to hand, child to child. They weren't artifacts, they were reminders, echoes of things never written, but always known. When someone forgot a detail, others would chime in, not to correct, but to restore. The story didn't belong to the speaker. It belonged to everyone, and each retelling wove the thread a little tighter into the collective mind. Even the shadows had roles to play. Children often gathered near the edge of the firelight, casting shapes with their fingers against rocks or skins.
O rabbit, o bird, o cloud beast.
These weren't just games. They were echoes of deeper fears and fascinations. Some elders told stories entirely with shadows, their hands dancing across the firelit canvas, creating movement where there was only stillness. These silent tales captured the children's attention like nothing else. No voice, yet full of sound. No script, yet rich in narrative. Shadows became a secret language. A wolf's howl could be shaped with fingers. A falling tree mimicked with arms. And when the story ended, the quiet that followed felt like a spell breaking. The darkness held stories, too. When the fire burned low and only embers remained, the shadows grew bolder. And in them, the listeners saw not only the past, but possibilities. Not everything had to be spoken. Some lessons hid in silence. There were no authors, no scribes, but there were keepers. Certain elders were known for their memories. They remembered the long stories, the ones about floods, migrations, and ancestral lands. These tales were not told every night. Only at special times, when someone died, or when a child came of age, or when the stars returned to a certain pattern. These epic stories took hours to tell, sometimes days. They were told in parts, like chapters, and only a few knew them from start to end. The camp honored these keepers not with titles, but with attention. When they spoke, no one interrupted. The children sat still. The fire burned low, and the voice carried not just across the camp, but across time. A story told in that moment might be the same one told 50 winters ago, or 500. There was no book to prove it, but no one doubted. Memory was sacred, and when it was spoken, it became alive again. The songs that came later in the night were different. Slower, sometimes sung alone, sometimes by a few voices in harmony. They were not meant for performance. They were meant for sleep, lullabies for adults as much as children. Some were wordless, just humming or soft tones rising and falling. These songs carried the rhythm of breathing, of waves, of wind through tall grass. They wrapped the camp like a blanket. A woman might hum while stroking a child's hair. A man might tap a bone flute gently while staring into the fire. No one needed to remember every note. The song remembered itself. Some had been sung for so many generations. No one knew who first created them. It didn't matter. They existed to soothe, to connect, to mark the end of day. Even those who had spoken little throughout the evening would join in the humming. And in that shared tone, hearts beat together, slower and slower, preparing for the night's silence. This was culture before permanence. Nothing was etched into stone, nothing inked onto bark, yet everything mattered. A phrase misremembered might shift a meaning. A song sung too soon might upset a ritual. But somehow the story stayed. The rhythms endured. Memory was not a private possession, it was a public trust. And the evening gatherings weren't optional. They were essential. You could survive with food and shelter. But to belong, you had to know the stories. You had to speak the chants. You had to hum the right notes. Culture was not separate from survival. It was part of it. It bound the group. It warned of dangers, taught without instruction. It united without structure. And through this invisible thread of voice and movement and sound, the tribe carried its identity through generations. Long before anyone thought to write a word, they had already created a world, one breath, one story, one shadow at a time. As the fire dimmed, one final story might be told, one only shared when the night was deep and quiet. These stories weren't for all ears, only those old enough to understand. Often they spoke of the spirits, those who walked unseen, who lived in the forest, or in the stars, or under the ground. These tales didn't frighten, they prepared. They reminded the listeners that the world was vast, mysterious, and alive in ways no tool or trap could grasp. They reminded the tribe of humility, of awe, and when the final word was spoken, no one clapped, no one cheered. They simply sat in stillness, letting the tale settle into the air. Sometimes someone would place a stone on the ground, a quiet offering, a marker that the story had been received. The fire hissed, the wind moved through the trees, and the camp, wrapped in the final notes of voice and memory, leaned into the night, forever changed. Nightfall did not erase what was spoken, sealed it. The songs and stories of the evening sank deep into minds, traveling into dreams, repeating in the hush of thought. Children whispered lines to each other in the dark. Elders murmured refrains to the stars, and the tribe slept knowing who they were and who they had always been. Their stories would not last on stone or clay or skin, but they would last in flesh and voice, passed mouth to mouth, generation to generation. This was how they endured, not just as hunters or gatherers, but as storytellers. Memory made into music, language shaped by firelight. Every story retold, every chant repeated, was a step into the future. And even now, long after their voices faded, something of those nights remains. A rhythm in our lullabies, a pattern in our myths, a voice inside us, whispering that before anything was written, we already knew how to remember. Chapter 6: The Nightwatch and the Dreamers Sleep in the Ancient World. As the fire died down, so did the voices. Stories faded into whispers. Laughter softened into yawns. Slowly, the Mesolithic camp slipped into stillness. But nightfall was not a simple curtain closing the day. It was another world entirely. For ancient people, the night brought both danger and wonder. There were no locked doors, no fences, no lanterns on command. Only the flicker of flames, the chill of the air, and the constant hush of nature waiting. Sleep did not come easily or all at once. It was staggered, uncertain, often broken. Someone always stayed awake. This role rotated, quietly assigned but never taken lightly. The Nightwatch sat near the fire, eyes scanning the dark, ears tuned to every snap of twig or distant howl. This person was more than a guard. They were a listener, a keeper of safety while others dreamed. The tribe trusted them not just with their lives, but with the passage from waking to dreaming. Families huddled close, sometimes under the same shelter, sometimes spread among animal skins and branches. Heat was precious, and bodies shared it instinctively. Children were cradled between elders, swaddled in fur or dried grass. There were no beds,
No pillows.
only earth beneath and sky above. Still, the way people slept reflected something deeper than physical need. It showed trust. The camp was a circle, its members wrapped in silence like a woven net. Outside, predators roamed, wolves, bears, even other humans. Yet inside there was calm. Sleep, though fragmented, was sacred. It offered escape and renewal. Some people drifted off quickly. Others stared at the stars through cracks in the roof or the open sky. They searched constellations for signs, patterns passed down in story and superstition. Did that cluster mean rain? Did the stars' movement signal an early migration? These thoughts filled the quiet moments before sleep. The mind wandered, and slowly, it let go of the firelight and stepped into the dark. Dreams in 10,000 BCE were not brushed off. They were not explained away by science or dismissed as nonsense. They were messages, sometimes warnings, sometimes revelations. A woman might wake from a dream and insist the group move their shelter before the next storm. If her vision had weight, others would listen. There was no clear line between waking knowledge and sleeping visions. Both were valid, both mattered. Some dreams felt realer than day itself. A hunter might dream of a beast and believe it was a sign. A child might speak of flying or sinking or burning, and the elder would quietly nod, remembering their own version. Dreams were personal but never private. Upon waking, people shared them. Around the morning fire, stories were told not only of the hunt but of what happened behind closed eyes. Dreams connected the tribe to something unseen, some force beyond the forest and river. And in a world without written language, these dreams were sacred messengers. The night was not silent. Even in stillness, the world hummed. Insects murmured in trees. Owls called in haunting tones. The wind passed through reeds, whispering old songs. For the sleeper, these sounds entered dreams, shaping their form. For the watcher, they meant everything. A sudden break in rhythm could signal a predator nearby. A too quiet patch of night might signal something unnatural. The Nightwatch had to know the difference between silence and alarm, between calm and threat. Sometimes they walked a slow circle around the camp, pressing footprints into soil still warm from day. They poked the fire, nudging coals back to life. Their shadow stretched like a ghost along the trees. If they heard a cry, they paused. Not every sound meant danger, but any sound could. This role demanded focus. Even when eyes ached for rest, the watcher held vigil. Their purpose was simple: let the others dream, and in doing so, hold the thin line between peace and peril. Sleep in 10,000 BCE was rarely long or uninterrupted. Came in waves. People dozed lightly, then woke briefly, then returned to rest. Some rose to add wood to the fire. Others stepped outside to check on traps or the sky. This segmented sleep allowed for flexibility, and it may have made early humans more attuned to their environment. They were never fully removed from it. A child might wake and ask for water. An elder might stretch, scratch their arm, or adjust a fur. These were not disturbances. They were part of the night's rhythm. Even those who slept deeply stirred now and then, drawn by dreams or cold or instinct. The idea of 8 perfect hours in a row was foreign. What mattered was restoration, however it came. And when the camp woke fully, no one asked how many hours they'd slept. They asked what dreams were seen, what animals called, what the night had whispered while they lay still. Some nights, people didn't sleep at all. A storm might sweep in, and the entire camp would stay huddled awake, listening to the sky's anger. Lightning flashed behind clouds. Thunder echoed like the footsteps of giants. In those moments, people drew closer together, not just for warmth but for comfort. No one understood the science of pressure systems or electric charge, but they knew power when they felt it, and they respected it. On calmer nights, certain people might stay up intentionally. A mother nursing a baby, a hunter returning late, an elder simply watching stars. These solitary hours were often filled with quiet thinking. Memory stretched long in darkness. Decisions were weighed, grief surfaced, joy stirred. Alone with the night, people didn't distract themselves. They sat with their thoughts. They listened to their heartbeat, the crackle of fire, the far-off hoot of an owl. These hours shaped them, and though most slept, a part of the tribe was always awake, always holding watch. There were beliefs, too, that nighttime was a crossing point, a veil between worlds. Some said dreams were visits from ancestors. Others believed certain animals carried souls through the night. Bats, owls, snakes. These were not just creatures. They were symbols, seen by moonlight and woven into story. People took note when an unusual animal appeared in the dark. It was no coincidence. It meant something. Even the direction it came from mattered. North was often associated with the past. East with birth, south with warmth, west with death. A movement from west to east could suggest a return, a rebirth. Night was never empty. It was a space teeming with quiet messages. The fire kept away some of the fear, but beyond its circle, everything felt bigger, older. So when someone dreamed of an ancestor's face, or a river that did not exist, they didn't question it. They told it, and the tribe listened because the night had always spoken, just in different voices. Children learned to sleep in steps. As babies, they clung to warmth and heartbeat. As toddlers, they cried at strange noises. But over time, they joined the rhythm. They learned that the watcher was there, that the fire would stay lit, that if they woke, someone would be close. Night became a teacher, not a thing to fear, but to respect. Some children even learned to wake for short shifts, to take turns watching, to feel useful. It gave them a sense of belonging. And when they saw their first set of glowing eyes in the brush, and didn't cry, they were praised quietly the next morning. Not for bravery, but for awareness. The tribe needed everyone, even the young. And learning to rest, to dream, to guard, it was all part of that need. Sleep was not an escape. It was part of survival, a cycle as essential as hunting or fire. One did not master the day without first understanding the night. There was something deeply unifying about sleep in this world. No one disappeared into a room. No one isolated themselves behind a door. Dreams, sounds, bodies, they were shared. A sneeze might wake the group. A laugh in sleep might cause ripples of curiosity. People didn't apologize, they adapted. The tribe breathed together, slept together, woke together. That intimacy bred a kind of closeness we have nearly forgotten. The kind that cannot be texted or tracked. It was lived in silence and stillness, in shared air and shared dreams. And even those who wandered in their sleep, who muttered strange words or rolled toward the fire, were seen as special, touched by something beyond. They might be given more attention in the days to come. Not all dreams were considered equal. Some were signs, others simply echoes. But all were listened to, because every dream, every sleepless shift, was part of the tribe's dialogue with the unknown, part of their negotiation with the night. Some sleepers wore charms, twisted bits of bone or beads believed to ward off bad dreams. Others smeared herbs across their skin to keep spirits at bay. These weren't superstition. They were early psychology, ways to cope with fear, to make sense of the dark. If a dream troubled someone, it wasn't ignored. It was discussed. Elders might offer stories that mirrored the fear, or they might teach a chant to soothe the sleeper next time. There was no embarrassment in dreaming, only curiosity, and perhaps a kind of reverence. After all, in the quiet dark, The soul could speak in ways daylight never allowed. Through dreams, people saw futures, remembered pasts, or met faces they had long forgotten. The brain, unwatched, wandered into places the waking world could not reach. And when it returned, it brought gifts. A feeling, an idea, a warning. The dream was not locked inside the sleeper. It belonged to the tribe, and the tribe carried it forward. Eventually, the sky began to shift, not suddenly, but with the slow, invisible certainty of dawn. The stars faded one by one. The air thickened with mist. Birds began to chirp, first distantly, then closer. The Nightwatch stood and stretched, their legs stiff, their mind fogged. But they had done it. The camp had passed safely through another night. A few sleepers stirred. Children shifted beneath furs. Someone added a log to the fire, stirring it back to life. The dreams were still fresh, the stories not yet told. Soon people would rise, yawn, stretch their backs. They would speak of what they saw in the night, of fears that visited, of animals heard. But for one more moment, they lingered in the in-between, not fully awake, not still asleep. This moment mattered. It was a quiet passing, like stepping through a doorway. The dream world didn't vanish. It echoed, and in that echo, the ancient people of 10,000 BCE remembered something we often forget. Sleep was not just rest. It was communion with fear, with memory, with mystery. In 10,000 BCE, the night was not wasted. It was listened to, guarded, embraced. Every dream was an offering, every night watch a vow. In that sacred rhythm of waking and sleeping, watching and dreaming, early humans shaped not only their survival but their spirit. They emerged each morning not just alive, but fuller, a little wiser, a little closer to something they could not name but always felt. It hummed in the stillness. It breathed in the stars. And when they opened their eyes, they carried the night with them, like a whispered truth tucked into their bones. Chapter 7: A Ritual at the Edge of Memory. The forgotten ending of every day. As the last ember of daylight sank beneath the trees, the camp hushed. Not suddenly, but in layers. Movements slowed, voices softened. Even the forest seemed to exhale. This was not yet sleep, nor was it truly waking. It was something between, an ancient pause at the threshold of the day's end. In the world of 10,000 BCE, there were no clocks, but people still knew time. They knew the moment when labor ceased and something quieter, more sacred, began. The tribe gathered, not out of obligation, but instinct. A shared understanding passed through generations. As twilight deepened, a small ritual unfolded. It didn't need words. A gesture here, a breath there, a glance at the fire, a hand resting on a knee. Sometimes they formed a loose circle. Other times they sat where they were, but they listened, not just to each other, but to everything, the wind, the flames, the earth beneath. The ritual was presence. It was pause. It was the breath before darkness. It did not matter if the day had been easy or cruel, if the hunt failed or the baskets were full. The ending came all the same, a kind of surrender, and this surrender needed a rhythm, a signal, a reminder that the world would turn, and all would begin again. For some, this took the form of slow, swaying movement. A mother might rock side to side while humming low, her baby pressed close. Children might sit cross-legged, drawing invisible lines in the dirt. waiting for the sky to dim. A few would whisper songs passed down through generations, their melody built not of scale or structure, but of repetition and tone. These songs did not translate to written notes. They lived only in air and memory. The fire was often the centerpiece, not a symbol but a presence. It crackled and shifted, casting warm orange light that danced across bare skin and stone tools. It gave the ritual its pulse. Some families marked this time with silence, a chosen silence, not out of tiredness, but reverence, as if they knew that words had run their course for the day, that whatever remained to be spoken could wait until the sun returned. In these moments, the mind had room to settle. Thoughts fell into place like beads in a string, threading the events of the day together. Reflection did not need a mirror, only stillness. And in this stillness, a child might remember the shape of a new leaf, or the face of an animal glimpsed through the brush. A father might trace the edges of a tool he had shaped earlier, feeling where the stone obeyed or resisted. Even the elders, often quiet through the day, came alive in this silence, not with speech, but with presence, their breath steady, their eyes soft, as if they had seen this ending 1,000 times and still marveled at it. The edge of memory approached again. There were nights when the ritual took sound instead of silence, not loud, but layered. Someone might start with rhythm, two hands clapping slowly, softly, like heartbeat echoes. Another might hum deep and even, voices joined, not in melody, but in harmony with the fire's crackle and the wind's sigh. The rhythm was not for entertainment. It was for connection, not to impress but to synchronize, a way to remind each person, you are part of something larger. The tribe, the earth, the cycle. Even young children sensed when it was time to listen, or sway, or close their eyes. These rhythms became internal clocks, not mechanical but biological, emotional. They marked the border between doing and being, between day and night, and when the rhythm faded, it wasn't missed. Its disappearance was part of the ritual. It was the signal that the body could let go, that the work was done, that dreams could rise without shame or rush or interruption. Sometimes stories were told, short ones like flickers of memory, a hunt gone wrong, a river crossed, a fire that wouldn't light. These tales did not always have morals. They were not told to teach, but to remember, to keep names alive, to make sense of a world where time had no record. A story could link a boy to his grandfather, a girl to her grandmother. They might hear about a place far away, never seen but vividly imagined. These moments rooted identity. The past wasn't fixed. It was fluid, handed down like a stone worn smooth. Each telling changed slightly, shaped by the night's mood. Some nights, stories were forgotten entirely. There was no need. The ritual was flexible. The essence was the gathering, the togetherness, the willingness to pause and mark the moment. Whether by words or silence or song, the tribe always honored the end, because to ignore it felt wrong, like leaving a meal unfinished or a doorway open. There were gestures, too, repeated motions passed from elder to child, the way a hand was brushed across the ground before sitting, the pattern of smoke waved toward the stars, the slow twist of grass wrapped into a cord and tucked away. These gestures did not need explanation. They were understood through practice, through imitation. Sometimes a child asked why. The answer was not given in words, but in time. These movements were like signatures, subtle declarations that this day had been lived, and now it could rest. Some of these gestures were lost through the ages. Others survived in forms we still feel today. The way we turn off lights, lower our voice, or draw a curtain. A softness enters, a quieting. The body remembers even when the mind forgets. This final part of the day, this ritual, whatever shape it took, was a closing chapter. Not grand, not loud, but essential. It made the difference between exhaustion and peace. There were no clocks to tell them when to sleep. No announcements that the day was done. The sun gave its last glow, and they responded. The body, trained by thousands of sunsets, knew the rhythm. And so the ritual did not need a start time. It happened when it felt right, when the shadows reached a certain length, when the birds gave their final calls, when the heat faded from the rocks. These cues were subtle, yet deeply embedded. And if a storm rolled in early, or the moon rose full and bright, the ritual adjusted. It was not rigid. That was its strength. It lived inside the people, not outside of them. They didn't need reminders. The practice had become part of their being. And though every tribe may have done it differently, the essence was shared. The honoring of the day's end. The recognition that waking life had a counterbalance. That sleep was not just collapse, but transition. Not every tribe performed this ritual together. Sometimes it was personal, solitary. A man might sit at the edge of camp, watching the trees bend in the wind. A woman might comb her fingers through ash, searching for patterns. A child might whisper to the stars, asking questions no one else could hear. These were rituals too, small, private endings. They didn't need witnesses. They simply needed intention. In a world of survival, intention was everything. Turned a movement into meaning, pause into purpose. These quiet acts marked the difference between living and merely existing. And though no two people ended their day the same way, they all felt the shift. The invisible curtain that fell with night. It was a shared solitude, an agreement without words. And while the tribe settled together, each person crossed that threshold in their own way, their own rhythm, their own ritual. And in doing so, they gave the dark its place. The youngest sometimes created their own patterns, stacking stones before sleep or tracing shapes in mud. They had no memory of not doing this. Felt natural, like a language they were born speaking. These small patterns mattered. They trained the child to recognize endings, to feel closure. Not every day was full of joy. Some brought fear, hunger, or grief. But even then, the ritual grounded them. It reminded them they were still part of the tribe, still part of the world, that the sun would return, and that this moment, however dark, was not forever. Adults didn't question the children's rituals. They watched with quiet approval. Sometimes the adults adopted them too. The wisdom of the young was not dismissed. It was folded into the shared practice. And so, over generations, the ritual evolved, softened, strengthened. It adapted to the mood of the people. But it never vanished, because something in the human heart always craves ceremony, even when words are few. Somewhere deep in us, it still lives. The need to end the day with care, to signal to the body and mind, it is time. Even in our modern world of screens and alarms, the old instinct stirs. We dim lights, we change clothes, we adjust our tone. We perform little acts, stretching, sighing, pulling covers, that echo a time when those gestures were sacred. We may not gather by fire, we may not chant or sit in circles, but we still need that pause, that exhale. Without it, sleep feels rushed, the day feels unfinished, and something in us remains restless. These rituals, long buried beneath layers of convenience and noise, are still within reach. We only need to remember or listen, because the body never forgets what it once knew. It carries the memory like a song hummed in a dream, a soft reminder that the end of the day is not a closing, but a return. In 10,000 BCE, this return was everything. It was how people measured time before calendars, how they healed without medicine, how they connected without language. The ritual at day's end was not a luxury. It was as vital as water or fire, and it gave meaning to the hours that came before it. The ritual said, we lived today, we survived, we mattered. It held grief, it held joy, it held silence, and it asked nothing more than presence. As the last ember faded, and the people sank into sleep, they were not alone. They were wrapped in something ancient, something real, a rhythm older than memory, yet alive in every breath. And maybe, just maybe, it is still with us, beneath the hum of our modern world, waiting to be felt, waiting to be honored, one small movement at a time, one soft breath before sleep, the forgotten ending of every day, remembered once more.